In the spring of 1861, as Confederate artillery opened fire on Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor, a Prussian military attaché stationed in Washington began drafting the first of what would become hundreds of dispatches sent across the Atlantic. His name was Justus Scheibert, and his observations would help reshape European warfare within a decade. Prussia in the 1860s was not yet Germany. It was a militaristic kingdom in northern Europe, ambitious but constrained, surrounded by rivals. The Prussian General Staff, headquartered in Berlin, operated under a singular obsession, understanding how modern wars were won, but nothing prepared them for what was about to unfold in North America. The American Civil War was not supposed to be interesting. European observers initially dismissed it as a colonial squabble. They were catastrophically wrong. What emerged instead was the First Industrial War, fought with railroads, telegraphs, and mass-produced weapons across a continental scale, and Prussia was paying attention. Helmuth von Moltke the Elder ran the Prussian General Staff with the precision of a watchmaker. He had spent his entire adult life studying warfare. He understood that war was changing, but he needed evidence. The American conflict provided exactly that. Moltke did not care about slavery or states' rights. He cared about how armies moved, how they communicated, and how industrial capacity translated into battlefield victories. The railroad observations came first. In Virginia during 1862, Union General George McClellan transported an entire army of 100,000 men to the peninsula by ship and rail. Confederate General Thomas Jackson moved his troops by rail to defeat 3 separate Union armies in the Shenandoah Valley within a single month. The Prussian observers noted something crucial. Whoever controlled the railways controlled the pace of war. Prussia had railways. Traditional European military thinking treated railroads as commercial infrastructure. The American experience suggested otherwise. When properly organized, railroads allowed armies to concentrate forces faster than enemies could respond. The telegraph changed everything about command. Before 1861, generals led from the front. Messages traveled by courier on horseback. The American War demonstrated that a commander could sit in Washington or Richmond and coordinate armies hundreds of miles apart in real time. Edwin Stanton, the Union Secretary of War, essentially ran military operations from a telegraph office. Moltke recognized the implications immediately. The telegraph did not just speed up communication. It fundamentally altered what was possible in warfare. A general with telegraph access could manage multiple armies as a single instrument. This required new doctrine, new training, and new organizational structures. Entrenchments presented a puzzle. European military tradition emphasized aggressive maneuver and decisive battle, yet in America, entrenchments worked. During the Siege of Petersburg in 1864 and 1865, Confederate forces held off a much larger Union army for nearly 10 months using elaborate trench systems. The lesson was that modern firepower made frontal assaults extraordinarily costly. The Prussian observers noted something else. Entrenchments were temporary. Armies dug in, fought, then moved and dug in again. Modern entrenchments were tactical tools, not permanent fortifications. They bought time, preserved forces, and forced enemies to solve difficult problems under fire. Forced marches demonstrated that speed still mattered. Both Union and Confederate commanders pushed their troops to exhaustion, covering distances European armies considered impossible. During the Gettysburg Campaign in 1863, both armies marched over 20 miles per day for weeks. Speed created opportunities. Slowness invited defeat. The concept of total war emerged gradually. then suddenly. By 1863, Union General William Tecumseh Sherman concluded that destroying the South's economic capacity was not cruelty, but necessity. His march through Georgia in 1864 deliberately targeted railroads, farms, and industrial facilities. The goal was not just to defeat Confederate armies, but to eliminate their ability to sustain those armies. Sherman's approach horrified traditional European officers, but Sherman argued he was shortening the war, saving lives by making continued resistance obviously futile. His methods worked. Georgia's infrastructure collapsed. Confederate armies began disintegrating from lack of supplies. The war ended 4 months after Sherman reached Savannah. The American Civil War was fundamentally about whether the United States would survive as a single nation. 7 states seceded in early 1861, followed by 4 more after Fort Sumter. The Union's position was straightforward. Secession was illegal, the Union was permanent, and rebellion would be suppressed. 4 years of fighting settled the question militarily. Over 600,000 men died, roughly 2% of the entire American population. When Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse in April 1865, he was accepting that the United States would remain united, that no state could leave, that federal authority superseded state sovereignty. The war preserved an existing union through force. The result was a more centralized federal government with expanded powers. The United States emerged from the war larger, stronger, and more unified than before, though at tremendous cost. Prussia faced a different challenge. Germany in the 1860s was not a single nation but dozens of independent states. They shared language and culture but maintained separate governments, armies, and foreign policies. Austria, the dominant German-speaking power, preferred this fragmentation. Otto von Bismarck became minister-president of Prussia in 1862. He had a clear goal: unify Germany under Prussian leadership. He also understood that unity could not be achieved through negotiation. Only external pressure, applied strategically, could force the outcome Bismarck desired. The Danish War of 1864 was Bismarck's first move. The dispute involved control of Schleswig and Holstein. Bismarck convinced Austria to join Prussia in a brief war against Denmark. Denmark lost. But rather than resolve the duchy's status, Bismarck ensured the peace treaty left ambiguities that would provoke future conflict between Prussia and Austria. The Austro-Prussian War of 1866 was decisive. Bismarck manufactured a crisis, then maneuvered Austria into appearing as the aggressor. The war lasted 7 weeks. Prussian forces, using railways for rapid mobilization and telegraph for coordination, defeated Austrian and Allied armies in multiple simultaneous campaigns. The crucial battle occurred at Königgrätz in Bohemia, where 2 Prussian armies arrived from different directions on the same day. Austria's defeat was total. Bismarck imposed a moderate peace that excluded Austria from German affairs but avoided humiliating annexations. The German Confederation dissolved. Prussia established the North German Confederation, effectively a Greater Prussia. The Franco-Prussian War of 1870 to 1871 completed German unification. A dispute over the Spanish throne escalated into war. Prussian armies, now joined by southern German forces, mobilized faster and struck harder than French forces could respond. Within 6 weeks, Napoleon III was captured at Sedan. Paris endured a siege through winter before surrendering. During the Siege of Paris, on January 18, 1871, in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, the German Empire was proclaimed. The unification Bismarck had engineered through 3 wars was complete. Prussia created unity through external wars. The American Civil War preserved unity through internal war. The United States fought itself. Germany fought its neighbors. Both achieved centralization, but through opposite paths. There is another difference worth noting. The American Civil War was existential from the start. The Union faced dissolution. Prussia's wars were calculated instruments of policy. Bismarck started each war knowing he could stop if necessary. He used military force to achieve specific political objectives, then made peace before enemies could coalesce against him. Both outcomes strengthened central authority. The United States federal government emerged with unprecedented power over states. The 14th Amendment fundamentally limited state sovereignty. Germany centralized under Prussian military dominance. The empire was federal in form but Prussian in substance. The American Civil War demonstrated that industrial capacity determined military outcomes. The Union did not win primarily because of superior generalship, but the Union had more factories, more railroads, more telegraph lines, more population. Confederate forces fought effectively for 4 years but could not overcome systematic industrial disadvantages. The Union produced over 100,000 tons of iron annually by 1864. The Confederacy produced less than 15,000. The Union manufactured rifles, ammunition, and artillery in quantities Confederate forces could not match. This was not sustainable. The Confederacy could win battles but could not win a war of attrition. Prussia absorbed this lesson completely. When planning the war against Austria, Moltke focused on logistics, industrial mobilization, and the systematic application of technological advantages. Prussia's railway network was designed with military mobilization in mind. When war began, Prussian railways moved 5 armies to concentration points faster than Austrian forces could mobilize. The war was half won before major battles occurred. The needle gun gave Prussia a technological edge. This breech-loading rifle could be fired from a prone position and reloaded much faster than muzzle-loading weapons. Prussian infantry at Königgrätz fired 5 times faster than Austrian troops. In combination with entrenchments, this created killing zones Austrian attacks could not cross. The pattern was consistent: industrial production, technological innovation, and systematic organization defeated enemies who relied on traditional military virtues. Modern war required industrial economies capable of equipping mass armies with advanced weapons and supporting them through coordinated transportation and communication networks. Railroad mobilization was Moltke's obsession. He understood that wars were decided in the first weeks, sometimes before battles occurred. Traditional mobilization was chaotic. Moltke revolutionized mobilization by treating railways as military instruments. When mobilization began, trains followed precise schedules. The entire Prussian army could mobilize and deploy to borders within weeks. In the war against Austria, 5 Prussian armies totaling over 250,000 men were concentrated on Austrian borders in 18 days. Austria required over a month to mobilize similar numbers. By the time France was ready to fight in 1870, Prussian forces were already across the border. The telegraph enabled distributed command. Moltke commanded 5 separate armies from Berlin and field headquarters during the Austrian War. He did not micromanage tactical decisions. Instead, he provided strategic objectives and let army commanders determine execution. This system, called mission-type tactics, gave subordinates freedom to respond to local conditions while maintaining strategic coordination. The American Civil War provided the model. Grant, when he became overall Union commander, used telegraph to coordinate actions with Sherman in Georgia, Benjamin Butler in Virginia, and Philip Sheridan in the Shenandoah Valley. These operations were synchronized to prevent Confederate forces from shifting troops between theaters. Entrenchments were a controversial lesson. The American Civil War demonstrated that modern firepower made frontal assaults suicidal against prepared positions. The battles of Fredericksburg and Cold Harbor exemplified this reality. At Cold Harbor in June 1864, Grant ordered a frontal assault on entrenched Confederate positions. Union forces suffered 7,000 casualties in less than an hour. Prussian observers noted that successful attacks required overwhelming artillery preparation, surprise, or flanking maneuvers. At Königgrätz, Austrian forces attempted frontal assaults against entrenched Prussian positions and suffered catastrophic casualties. Austria lost over 40,000 casualties. Prussia lost fewer than 10,000. Abraham Lincoln and Otto von Bismarck were different men pursuing different goals through similar means. Lincoln inherited a constitutional crisis and used military force to preserve federal authority. He expanded presidential power dramatically. His goals were fundamentally defensive: preserve the Union, enforce federal law, ultimately abolish slavery. Bismarck engineered crises deliberately to achieve predetermined objectives. He manipulated diplomatic situations to make Prussia appear as the aggrieved party. He used military success to reshape European politics, establishing Germany as the dominant continental power. Both leaders understood that military victory alone was insufficient. Lincoln needed to restore Southern states to the Union without creating permanent regional enmity. Bismarck needed to unify Germany without provoking coalitions of threatened powers. After defeating Austria, he imposed moderate peace terms to avoid creating a permanent enemy. Both leaders used war to transform political structures. The United States after 1865 was fundamentally different from before 1861. Federal authority increased dramatically. Slavery was abolished. Germany after 1871 was something entirely new. Its creation required defeating Austria, marginalizing France, and convincing dozens of states to surrender sovereignty. The American Civil War was existential. The Union faced dissolution. There was no middle ground. Either the Union would survive intact or it would not. Prussia's wars were calculated. Bismarck started each war with clear, limited objectives. In each case, Bismarck could have accepted compromise without Prussia's existence being threatened. This distinction matters. The United States fought for survival. Prussia fought for advantage. Both used military force to achieve political transformation, but the nature of that transformation differed fundamentally. Both conflicts marked the arrival of modern, industrial, centrally directed warfare. The American Civil War became an industrial war as both sides mobilized their economies completely. By 1864, the Union was producing war materials on unprecedented scales. Prussia planned for industrial warfare from the beginning. Moltke understood that future wars would be won through systematic mobilization of economic resources and coordination of multiple armies across vast theaters. Industrial capacity, properly organized and directed, determined outcomes more surely than traditional military virtues. Central direction became essential. Railways and telegraphs made coordination possible. Commanders who used these tools effectively won. Commanders who relied on traditional methods lost. The American and Prussian experiences established patterns that would dominate warfare for decades. The First World War applied these same principles on even larger scales. Railways moved millions of men. Telegraphs, then telephones and radios, coordinated operations across continents. Industrial production determined which nations could sustain prolonged conflict. Prussia did not just observe the American Civil War and learn from it. Prussia absorbed its lessons, refined its applications, and created military systems that would reshape Europe. The American Civil War demonstrated what was possible. Prussia demonstrated what was effective. The connections between these conflicts are not coincidental. They represent parallel responses to the same underlying reality. The Industrial Revolution had transformed how societies fought wars. The United States discovered these transformations through internal conflict. Prussia studied these transformations systematically and applied them through external conflicts. The legacy extended far beyond the 1860s and 1870s. The military systems developed during the American Civil War and perfected by Prussia became models for modern nation-states worldwide. Industrial warfare, total mobilization, telegraph coordination, railway logistics, and centralized command became standard features of conflicts through two world wars and beyond. The American Civil War preserved a union through devastating internal conflict. German unification created an empire through calculated external wars. Both outcomes established centralized nation-states that would dominate their respective regions. Both demonstrated that modern warfare required industrial capacity, technological superiority, and systematic organization. Prussia watched the American Civil War closely, learned its lessons carefully, and applied them ruthlessly. The result was the creation of Germany as Europe's dominant power and the establishment of military systems that would influence warfare globally for over a century.